Thank you very much, Alison. Very generous introduction. Really, I'm pleased to be here, join this conference, especially on the topic of development cooperation in tomorrow's world, which is, I think, for all of us, is a very relevant and great important to be discussed. Here in this country, UK, as you know, is a very important player on the global development and making significant contribution all over the world to poorest countries. And I know that the debate about how you are going to allocate money to where and to measure the result especially is going to be even harder when the global economy is changing. So I see that the ODI initiative today to discuss about this development issue, especially dealing with the change, is very timely. Let me start, and I think the introduction is just telling all of you that I changed my role from the recipient client side into the multilateral. That sometimes provide me with the opportunity to see how the multilateral institution dealing with a lot of clients from the business side of the development, while on the other hand there is also the recipient side, especially like Indonesia, who many of you recognize as a middle income country, which is now even having the access of capital market, financial with the investment grade. I think that's a status which is quite, for many of European country in crisis, is quite envying to see the investment grade for a country. So I'll touch that issue in my presentation. First, we are all recognized that there is a global change. There is a major global change which is happening now, and that will provide us with a different path in the next 20 years. Developing country or many middle income country, you can call it emerging country, has become the key drivers, both on the global economy, if you measure it in a growth, or especially also on a share of the income. So it changed the economic landscape globally. Developing countries have grown nearly 4 times if you look faster than developed country in the past decade. And that's, of course, you can easily identify it contributed mainly by a big middle income country like China and India. Even with this global economic situation, the weakening of United States, European in general, and struggle of many rich countries in dealing and sustaining their fiscal situation, the trajectory of many of these developing country and middle income country is going to continue because they have their own momentum as well as their own domestic demand supported by middle income class. So by 2025, one estimates 6 major emerging countries, Brazil, China, India, South Korea, Russia, and my own country, Indonesia, will together account for more than 50% of all global growth. That's quite remarkable if you see the composition has changed dramatically. In fact, in 20 years, most countries will have a different status. They become middle income country. And this is not just a semantic change, because many of our work is really depend on how you classify country in a low middle income country. Within the bank, I usually say that we are no longer, because now I oversee the whole World Bank operation, we are not divided by region like Latin America, Caribbean, Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then South Asia, East Asia Pacific, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. But we actually identify the client based on the level. That is the low-income country, middle-income country, fragile state, or even now, actually with a high-income country. A couple of high-income countries actually engage with us. So we are going to have most of the country in the middle-income country. And this trend, if you can see in the between 1990s and 2005, about 970 million poor, especially in East and South Asia, has joined the global, has graduated from the poverty, and in this case, they join what they call it the middle class. The role of middle class should not be underestimated. In many of the, even in the poor country, but also especially in many middle income countries, they provide not only in terms of the ability to sustain the growth and the progress, but they also actually the very effective group of people who can strengthen the institution in many of these countries. The demand for good governance, effective government, looking at the service delivery. So this is a phenomena. In fact, actually this week, the Bank Latin America and Caribbean Division just issue and publish this middle class phenomena that really sustain a lot of progress being made, especially in Latin America and Caribbean. So based on that trend, certainly on the Millennium Development Goal of halving the extreme poverty by 2015 is going to be achieved. Although you see that much of this progress explained mainly in China and India. But despite all this progress, we also see that there are quite many countries, especially in Africa, still like behind. 17 countries are far from even halving the extreme poverty. And that is going to be the trend in the next 20 years, and this is the discussion internally within the bank about the strategy for the next IDA. The concentration of poor country is going to be mainly on Africa and South Asia. So with that landscape change, the development cooperation will certainly also look different in the next 20 years. The biggest change in this case can be identified first on who the providers of development assistance. The traditional OECD countries will be joined by many new high and middle income countries. And this is a phenomena which is everybody notice, observe, but actually how to respond, how the new cooperation should be established is still a working in progress. We are all collectively try to shape that kind of cooperation. It's still a very new phenomena in a way that many of these new players will need to know each other in a different capacity. In the past as a recipient, now they become a partner. And that's not easy for both the old player as well as the new player. And the role of the middle income country is not only very significant on a growth as well as the income composition, but it will provide quite a lot of change in terms of the flow of knowledge. The influence of middle income country in the development cooperation, as they become more and more important, will contribute quite a lot of debate about the business model, even in this case the principle and the way they operate. I know here in the United Kingdom, you just recently announced to end the new grant and development aid for India. And this is just underscore the changing, the dynamic and relationship between the old tradition player on development cooperation or development aids with the new one. The second new player, which is also important, and here we are having also a lot of new speaker, the speaker of this conference, is actually on a private sector. Private philanthropy is an important source of financing for international aids and development. In fact, public-private partnerships have also climbed significantly if you look between 1990 to 2008. Private sector contributed 1.4 trillion in financing, especially on the infrastructure and public infrastructure with the PPP or public-private partnership. And this is the area which is traditional even for the bank, because if you look at the portfolio of lending of the bank, we actually still continue lending on the infrastructure. We see that PPP is becoming one of the business model. That should not be seen as a threat, but it's more an opportunity for us to leverage. The change on the landscape of the development aid is also on the recipient side. There is no doubt that we are going to see that the demand for assistance is there. It's just the demand change because the recipients is also changed with time. Country will continue share the common development agenda, reducing poverty is still there. Even when the country changed the status from low to become middle income country, it doesn't mean that they are not addressing or facing with the issue of poverty. I think the issue of inequality or absolute poverty is still there, but more and more now the discussion is about relative poverty. And that's why within the bank, we call it the boost, share prosperity, or reducing inequality become the important theme when we are dealing with many middle income countries. The common goal will depend of continue reducing poverty and creating or accelerating shared prosperity will really depend on whether the economy will be able to create a decent and meaningful job, improving infrastructure, supporting human development, and also addressing the demographic change, as well as tackling the problem of climate change. And this is especially visible in many countries dealing with urbanization, how to design the urbanization process in a way that is going to be much greener, using more efficient energy, and have a less carbon footprint. And also, because of the magnitude as well as the space or the size of the many middle income countries, they are dealing with the local government capacity. That is the capacity of the public finance as well as managing and executing public service delivery for the people. So this development issue will remain on the global agenda. What will change is actually the player and how we actually interact to each other. At the recipient side, for the World Bank own, we observe that there is a change. We are still dealing with, in fact, high-income country. Here in European country, we have several clients, which is actually classified within our category as a high-income country. Still, we are engaged with them. I'm not specifically mentioned about the European crisis in which they have to deal and struggle with the fiscal sustainability. Amazingly, we discuss a lot on a low-income country with this fiscal sustainability problem. The source of the fiscal unsustainability is different. But I think at the end, the macroeconomic framework, which is we tend to take for granted because many middle-income countries already put it within their framework, is actually violated quite long, and that's then provide with this current situation in many advanced countries. So maybe the textbook of 1980, 1990, if you are all in the economic department, should be shifted and should be taught again in many high-income countries. While for the low and middle-income countries, they have to look and continue to do the structural reform, yes. But I think this is the second generation of reform about institutional capacity. So we see that the high-income country is facing with the development problem, challenge, because if they are not going to address this issue of fiscal sustainability, demographic change, that will create quite a development issue for them. You see that the quality of life is going to really decrease. And that is a threat for both the social and political stability. Middle income country, which is seen as a star in the global economic scene, they're not actually free for problem. Coming from middle income country like Indonesia, I know exactly well that new position and the new headline position by many middle income country actually make us not much difficult to address a lot of, because the pressure from both international community as well as domestic constituent is really there. They still have to struggle to avoid, you call it middle income trap, that is to continue this progress to achieve the high income status, usually in the form of weak or still ineffective institution, governance problem, inequality, lack of infrastructure, because that is going to be the way to support further economic progress. Low income country is still dealing and struggle and how to develop themselves to become the next generation of emerging country. And here they also struggle with how to build the right and effective institution, accountable institution, and nurturing the dynamic of many private sector development, so the right business climate for them. So we are dealing with all those issues for low income country, middle income country, as well as high income country. Within our client, we also see the fragile state is one of a group which is very unique. As you know that the World Bank published this report on a fragile state, and the solution for the fragility will require three ingredients: security, justice, and jobs. And that's, if you talk about security and justice, it's not like an overnight or over 1 year or two. If you talk about the range of time, it's going to require 2 decades or even 3 decades. The question is how to sustain the engagement with adequate resource, but at the same time also making sure that there is a visible result on the ground. It's not easy. I mean, coming from Indonesia, in which we have part of the country, provincial area is a fragile, I know exactly well, in Aceh, really the solution of the security as well as the fragility only came after tsunami. That is when all parties becoming then realize that all the war among themselves, it's actually not bringing, and that need the natural disaster to wake them up and then come to the agreement. I don't think that in this case that you are going to import tsunami to all the fragile state in this case in order for that. But that is something which is, I think, for all of us, building security, justice, and job is a very long term. And that is something which for the bank, we know that many of our shareholders are asking us to focus on this fragile state. And that's have a huge implication in terms of the way we have to develop our business model, engagement, as well as the effectiveness of our engagement. So what is the implication with all those dynamic from the provider, the recipient, as well as the agenda that we are going to address on the modes of engagement on the development cooperation? As we are all expect that with the new players step into the scene, the development cooperation is definitely going to change and evolve. For many countries, traditional development financing will certainly have less leverage than it does. Just to give you the example, in low-income countries, ODA account for more than 60% of their total external financing between 2005 and 2010. For many middle-income countries, ODA is only playing less than 5%, 4% in fact, on this external financing. So you can see that the leverage and the influence of ODA in many of these many important middle-income countries who's in the very important stage of development is certainly much, much less. Foreign direct investment, trade, capital flow, or even it's become much, much more important. So many middle-income countries is increasingly placing on a non-lending engagement with many development agencies, including us with the bank. In fact, this week we actually discussing about this country partnership strategy with China, and you can see the dynamic of discussion on the board about why the banks still actually provide lending to China. I mean, the amount of lending is certainly so small comparing to the size of the economy, budget, or even if you talk about the reserve, 3 trillion reserve that they are having. I think they are really, it is not one-way traffic, one-way needs, or one-way flow of provider and then recipient, principal and agent. Or in this case, it's more like a mutual relationship. Knowledge, advice, technical advice, and even development cooperation is actually the theme for this kind of engagement. It is more two-way traffic. They want to see us operate, especially in a very difficult, remote, lag behind area or region. And they see how we address those. They look at the business model that we develop, the effectiveness, supervision, monitoring, technical quality. That is something that then for them to copy and to learn, to use their own money. And this is coincide with, of course, the P4R, that is the program for result, that is the new instrument which we develop and introduce on our lending, which is actually on the dimension of leverage and knowledge and institutional capacity and building is actually the spirit of this instrument. So at the World Bank, we see this significant change in the nature of our relationship with many of our clients. But I will not just actually end with addressing the issue in middle-income country. Even when you are dealing with the fragile and low-income country, the way we engage with them need to be revised and updated, because I think with the information technology, transparency, a speed of information, the way we are working is need to be revised. So for those countries, especially for the big middle income country, we are actually have to search as well as define ourselves the way we engage with them. And many middle income countries actually become the role model for many of the low income countries, and that's provide what you call it an opportunity for us to be engaged and facilitate this change. Many of our clients is actually asking if this is my own experience when I was finance minister, I was asked by my parliament how you are going to deal with many contingent liability, especially related to the state-owned enterprises. And then I asked the World Bank, the IMF, is there any model in the world in which any country have adopted the best business model governance of really presenting the contingent liability so that it will not mislead in terms of both risk, but at the same time, the governance and accountability. So that kind of thing. Every time you ask, and sometimes you just need, as a minister, to have a very quick, the idea, policy, sometimes then it will derive with the technical advice. That is something which is can be provided. And the role of multilateral institutions like the World Bank is actually quite strategic because we operate all over the world. It can be very easy to collect all the knowledge and experience, who's the expert in a very specific area, and how to mobilize that and connect with the demand or the need on the other hand. So the implication for us as a development, as a multilateral agency, we are not seeing this as a threat. We actually see this as an opportunity, whether the opportunity for us to be able to provide technical assistance. Many of these new players is actually still really new. Even in this case, I mean, when you talk about South-South cooperation, I know in the session you are going to discuss that, and I was actually asked to join the South-South cooperation, which is hosted by, again, Indonesia in Bali. And when they try to allocate money, I know in many emerging middle income countries, it's maybe a very small money, but they have to defend it in front of their parliament. I think the debate is also the same in UK. In many middle income countries, when you start to allocate money for ODA, for even South-South cooperation, the parliament will ask, well, we still have a lot of poor people in our country, a lot of lag behind. Why you are focusing and providing assistance to others? So it is a combination, not only the resource that is needed and shifted to others, but also a part of confidence and familiarity, that when you are engaged in international cooperation as a provider, you are actually not losing resource or knowledge. You're actually gaining more. But those ideas very difficult, even for the politician who's supposed to be well informed. Not all politicians well informed, but also for the public in general, how you defend the taxpayer money to be allocated outside the country. And that is the role of multilateral institutions like us, is becoming very, the opportunity provided by this kind of demand is very important, because then we can use both the technical system, business model, the effectiveness, how to measure the accountability is going to be provided for us to be able to present for many initial bilateral initiative by many emerging countries. So this is the area in which the collaboration partnership is becoming very, very important. But it doesn't mean that multilateral agency like World Bank have no problem. Definitely we are perceived as an institution which is too bureaucratic, sometimes too slow. It's very difficult and complicated, a lot of conditionality. The safeguard procurement is just impossible for them. So a lot of things that we do understand that there are always a tension, but I see it as a very healthy tension between the need to be faster, to be effective. On the other hand, we also want to build the right governance and not compromising the integrity. So on the last part of my this morning introduction to all of you, the World Bank, seeing all this change, we recognize that the change is happening. Not only that we recognize from our client, but also we can see the debate with our shareholder on the board. We are changing the way we do business because we see that this is something which is inevitable and also imperative for our institution to be able to still play a relevant, important, and effective role as a development agency. We are pursuing more targeted agenda under the new leadership, President Jim Yong Kim. He's asking for us to focus because it will be much easier for us to tell the story to all, both shareholder as well as client and wider stakeholder about who we are, what we are doing, what is the accountability, what is the result that we achieve. And that's why focusing on a global poverty reduction, eliminating poverty, which is still in line and aligned with the MDG, although the debate about post-MDG certainly is going to be there. But also focusing on more addressing this inequality, so how to accelerate more shared prosperity. We are listening to the demand, especially from the client, which has changed quite dramatically in the past decade. Middle income countries definitely require and need a different kind of engagement, but low income country and fragile state is also demand a different kind of engagement. And for us to be able to deal with all those different clients in the most effective and efficient way is something which is challenged. It is not one size fits all, but it's very easy to just say not one size fits all. It's very difficult to say, so what, if it is not one size fits all? Are you going to compromise on principle, on a governance, on what? If you are being flexible, what this flexibility means in terms of the way you engage with many of the clients. We develop new instruments, as many of you maybe also follow. In the past couple of months, we start introducing the program for result. This is the lending, which is supposed to be really focusing, and I think it's not new at all. Many of you as paying cash for result, cash for delivery, is almost the same. It's really the design of how you are going to really deliver the support when they really deliver the result. But it is not about that you want the result there. It is much bigger than that. Leverage, in my own experience and in at least 7 project or program which is approved on this program for result that I chair, mainly is really on how we use the small amount of financing from the World Bank to influence a much bigger own budget, their own money, whether this is on a road, whether this is related in health, on education, and even in this case, strengthening the capacity of the institution. So it's really much bigger leverage on the influence, on the capacity on the institution building, as well as using their own budget. That means for us, we'll be able to present them with the most effective business model, but at the same time accountable on the result is very important. That is not only for us, but most importantly for their own political constituent. We are also dealing with many middle income countries on what you call it, the sub-sovereign or subnational government. Brazil definitely is asking us to address the northern part, which is lag behind. China on an inland provincial area, which is also lag behind. Many of the middle income, Russia is also still asking that they are dealing, because many of these big middle income countries, they have a very strong, robust, healthy, or rich federal government. But they are dealing with the disparity across region. And how the central government dealing with this lag behind is just like how international community dealing with many countries in the world. And that kind of how we operate, how you address accountability, effectiveness, business model, that is something that engagement is becoming very, very important. So when the debate about whether you should target your money on a poor country or poor people, basically they coincide. If you are dealing with many middle income countries in which they will be able to use their own resource with a good business model, basically then you are going to deal the poor people in the many middle income countries with their own resource. But we can support and partnering with them with the cooperation. So And also in this case, governance and anti-corruption. The World Bank is still going, and we are leading in actually introducing the sanction system, debarred company, and so on. So it is still actually a debate about how you are going to influence the institution. I think that will cover quite a lot of discussion. In conclusion, as you see that within the international development cooperation, the discussion about the new player is there. It is about how all of us collectively is going to actually get engaged and have a very productive and constructive discussion. We have quite a lot of opportunity as a multilateral institution to become the institution that will facilitate this, what you call it, the process of shaping the international cooperation on a development with a new player. And definitely this is the mandate and the mission and the mandate from this period or history that provide us with this challenge. But as the World Bank, more and more we recognize this as an opportunity rather a threat, and at the same time also force us to change as the multilateral institution to be able to reform ourselves, to present ourselves as a credible institution so that it will be trusted not only by just a few major shareholders, but all our shareholders, but also with our client and stakeholder. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a fantastic opener. And what I took away from that is a strong indication that much remains on the global agenda, but the business of development cooperation not only has changed, but continues to change and needs to change, partly in response to the changing global poverty profile, but also to a new set of global and regional public good challenges, which I think Sri Mulyani referred to extremely well. Now, I would like to take the opportunity to offer you at least a few moments for any quick reactions and reflections and questions. We are going to keep this little segment quite short so that we can also allow for the broader discussion with the panel. I should add that we do actually have a virtual audience today. In addition to all of those of you in the room, we have about 200 people signed up to watch this event online. So to those of you who are watching online, I can also invite you to lodge your reflections and questions, and I'll pick them up here and we'll have an opportunity to feed them in over the next hour or so. But can I take any in the room just for now? Of any quick reactions and points of clarification? Over to Adrian there.
Thank you very much, Adrian Hewitt from ODI. Sri Mulyani, welcome, and welcome to London. And I'll ask you a question that really should only be put in London, perhaps, about change at the bank. At what stage would the bank seriously consider pulling out of India or pulling IDA out of India? The second question would be, you mentioned Europe, and you're in Europe now. You passed over it quite briefly. But then I was thinking about your neighbours across the road, because everybody knows the conundrum that they're taught in economics 101, that the fund's a bank and the bank's a fund. But the fund, the IMF, now devotes, I think it's even a majority of its lending to Europe. And it's I do a lot with the economic staff at the IMF, and a lot of them are being taken out of developing countries and put into European operations. Now, you said very quickly, there's only a couple of countries still in Europe. I expect you mean Moldova and one or two others that we couldn't even remember. Is the bank, it's not a financial stability forum like other places, but is the bank, and this time I don't mean IDA, considering doing more in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take a couple of others and then, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Lars Engberg Petersen from Copenhagen. I'm very interested in what you said about inequality and doing something about that in the longer run. Could you say something about how that will be tackled, or the possibilities for tackle that in a post-2015 process regarding new development goals? Thank you.
Let me take one more from in the room, if there is one. Otherwise, why don't I let you tackle those two quite meaty questions in themselves?
Okay. Well, I understand the debate about India is very here. It's the headline of this week, or it's been a couple of. I mean, for World Bank, it is not about the engagement with India. I mean, with India, we are dealing with the IDA question, whether they are graduated, but also within the IBRD, they actually reached the ceiling of lending on a profile of capacity to lend based on our capital in this case. So it is quite, for us, it's really a pressing issue. I mean, the demand is certainly there. I mean, the demand is not that they need the financing. Financing is definitely also needed, because if you look at the development challenge, both whether this is on an infrastructure, human development, they really need not only technical assistance, they really still need financing. The bank, as an institution, we have the capacity constraint given the capital that we are having. And that's why the question is about whether graduate or not graduate. IDA is just one issue which we need to address. There are a couple of, thinking, this is not yet final, because we are in the process of formulating our strategy for the IDA 17, of course. And losing India as a segment of low-income country to become the middle-income country, and that's graduated from IDA, provide us with a lesson which is actually for both client as well as for the bank is very valuable. That is that the graduation policy is more seen as a traumatic rather than a happy moment. This is different from all of you. You have children, sister, brother, graduated from any university, everybody usually happy. But in a bank, every graduation is always a very traumatic. And I don't think that is need to be the case. And that has something to do with the policy, which is not really actually providing that the development process is not like a one discrete. It is a one continuous. And even when you are reaching the high-income country, you can easily suffer setback when the policy is actually was bad and allowed to happen in a quite long time. You see it in Europe now. So in this case, I think the problem is not like the development, you reach a certain level and then you graduate it and that's it. You are on your own. Because even if you are graduated, you still need to have a constructive engagement. Even when dealing with the development issue itself, but also potentially they become a player on the development cooperation in the future. So for them to have this kind of good relationship, good memory, investing in the relationship, and even in this case that convince and provide them with the confidence that there is a huge business model that they can see, copy, or even in this case benchmark. I think that is very valuable. So for us, it is not about that the bank have the interest to maintain India as one country within the IDA. I think it's more a challenge for us to see the client as one continuous, and then how we are going to provide with both instrument, pricing if necessary, because you know that the discussion about pricing in the bank is not easy of the money. And then the modes of engagement, what kind of business model to deal with them. And that is a homework which is still continue for us, is actually now evolving. And this is captured within our modernization, innovation on the instrument, discussion with the board about pricing, consulting with our client. Even in this case, the client will give us a feedback, well, how about the governance of the bank? All those things, they are all interlinked. So the second question about whether what bank will consider ourselves to provide more assistance in Europe. First, I think the principle of engagement, it is really the demand driven, or if the client asks. If you are, the World Bank is a cooperative institution. There is certainly raising a concern. On the annual meeting last month in Tokyo, the fact that President Kim said that we are willing and we will provide assistance if it is requested by the European country in crisis, especially like Greece. Many of client is asking, is it going to shift our resource to this high-income country? It will challenge us in terms of cost. For purely the technical content of our engagement, Definitely, it is really an opportunity for us to provide with the expertise, but at the same time also establish our reputation as a development agency, because the issue which is now faced by Portugal, Greece, or European or even United States is actually faced by many countries. How you design the good pension which is sustainable, how you design the social safety net which is targeted, effective, but not distorted and unsustainable. That is very, very relevant in many middle-income countries, low-income countries. The problem is when you've already have a setting of policy which is already wrong and have a huge implication, it's created expectation as well as this continued demand. When you have to change it, politically it's going to be very difficult. Socially it's also very painful. And for many countries which is not yet entering to that kind of situation, they can learn. And that is how they learn from the institution like us. When we engage, it provides us with a credibility that we can tell this middle-income country, low-income country, don't repeat that, because we've already engaged and we see how difficult. It is not only on the financing side. Politically, socially, that is really, really very painful. I've been through that in Indonesia, in which we have financial crisis back in 97, 98. And that linked to the last question about inequality, how we are dealing with that. I mean, many countries, African countries is actually one very obvious example. Many natural rich countries, you just see amazingly the potential of revenue, government revenue, coming from their natural resource, mining. But then you can see at the same time the indicator, even maybe you don't trust this indicator, income per capita, the poverty level, the human development index, it's not justified with the resource that actually able to be used. So what is this inequality for all of us? I mean, coming from Indonesia, I do understand. Indonesia is also a very rich natural resource. In the past, it's because the contract by the multinational mining company was not transparent. We don't know. And that's for 30 years. It implies long time. There is also when the country becoming democratized and open, transparent, this question about the revenue, how you use the revenue, why we only get this one, sharing revenue between national and local government. So when you talk about inequality in this case, it's all dealing with the institutional setting, the right and good policy framework, the institutional capacity, even on the revenue side, not to mention on the expenditure side. When you collect the right revenue, people happy, oh, this is the fair share of revenue. The next question about how you use this revenue in a more equitable and addressing this issue. Issue of governance and corruption is definitely contributing inequality very, very, very blatantly. I think I see it in my own country. You can see it in many countries. So inequality is not about only the policy, what is the right policy. It is all about institutional, sometimes even the social contract. And that is actually need to be addressed in a more comprehensive. Institutions like us, the bank, have the opportunity because we actually dealing with the country in all layer, from the policy engagement up to the lending for addressing the issue of inequality by providing access to infrastructure and so on, up to on a human capital side, that is education, health is something which is basic infrastructure, basic services, and capacity building to deliver that one. So I think we see that, we have the experience, the knowledge is there. It's about how you are going. The most difficult is sometimes dealing with the vested interests and the elite capture on the inequality. And that is something which for us, there is no one-size formula that fits all. It's sometimes the history, it provide like the Middle East, Arab Spring, that provide an opportunity to correct this. But it will not guarantee unless you use this opportunity to then start building the right policy, a good institution, so that it will address the issue of inequality in the past.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I'm going to give my apologies to Zhisheng Li, who sent in a question online, and I'm going to bring that up a little bit later. Now, I'm going to take the opportunity to pass over to Edward Hedger, who is the head of CAPE, and he's going to introduce some of the themes of the conference today. Over to you, Ed.